We'll be talking about the Early Learning Challenge Grant. And let me say that much of this is still preliminary information. Very soon, in the spring and again in the fall, there are going to be some major updates on the Early Learning Challenge Grant and the Step Up to Quality. And then our second topic, a major topic, is going to be preschool special education updates. Following the Early Learning Challenge Grant updates, we're going to take some time reviewing the OSEP indicators, and we're going to be also talking at the recently received profile. And, of course, you know that provides information about each district, about its performance. And to help to increase your understanding of the results that districts received, Kara Waldron is going to be providing a presentation about the profile and its use. And what we are going to do at that time is we're going to take a minute or two of a break for you to gather any questions you have, and so we will have our first question and answer period following the presentation of the profile information. And then at that point, we'll continue until the end of the presentation, where again, we will take a few-minute break and give you an opportunity to gather your questions, and then we'll have the live question and answer period at the very end of the presentation. So we'll have two periods of question and answers in this webinar. Okay, so moving right along to the Ohio's Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge Grant. You can see that we're going to be looking at the child standards today. We're going to be looking at program standards and child assessment. And I tend to think of these as the three pillars that support this new initiative. Beginning with the domains of the early learning and development standards, which are the child development standards, we want to talk about each of these separately, but just kind of as an introduction. As a whole, these standards represent key concepts and skills that young children develop during the birth to 5 period. And the purpose of having these standards available to personnel is to support the development and well-being of young children and to foster their learning along a continuum. These standards are designed to promote understanding of early learning and development, and as well provide a comprehensive and coherent set of expectations around children's development and learning. And then finally, it's a guide. It helps to guide the design and implementation of curriculum and assessment, and it is helpful in developing approaches to help children to learn. So we have here, as you can see, the language and literacy development, and that reflects the skills and knowledge that are fundamental to children's learning of language, reading, and writing, and this pertains to children's growing ability to communicate effectively and express themselves through language and to use the growing vocabulary, which you know is definitely a key to the language and literacy development. Then we talk about general knowledge and cognitive development domain, and this encompasses children's knowledge of their physical and social worlds, including math, science, and social studies, and cognitive processes and skills that are fundamental to learning in different domains, including memory, symbolic thought, reasoning, problem solving, those kinds of functions. We then move on to social and emotional development, and as you know, these next three are recently developed and are really a keynote to the change that we're making in the way we're approaching looking at the whole child in terms of their development. So the social-emotional development standards involve behaviors that reflect children's emotional growth and their growing ability to successfully navigate their social world through interactions with teachers, familiar adults, and peers. So we'll be considering that as we look at child development. Approaches towards learning, and that centers around the foundational behaviors, dispositions, and attitudes that children bring to social interactions and learning experiences. Included in this is initiative and curiosity, motivation to participate in new and varied experiences and challenges. And this domain provides a focus on attention, engagement, and persistence, which are all important to child development and to learning. And then finally we have physical well-being and motor development. And this addresses the motor skills, but it also looks at the health practices that are essential for children's overall development. These skills include the ability to use large and small muscles to produce movements, touching, grasping, manipulating objects, engaging in physical activity. And these standards also talk about the development of health practices that become part of a child's routine and self-care tasks. And so this one, as well as the social-emotional development, as well as the general knowledge and cognitive development, and literacy and language and literacy development are really key to looking at a child through the lens of the three outcomes that we use for Indicator 7 information. And so they're very well represented in this continuum, and I just wanted to bring that to your attention in particular. We are planning for beginning in the spring of 2013, and I think I mentioned that that's when some more information is going to be forthcoming. There will be a curriculum alignment tool available, and this tool will help programs in aligning their curriculum and assessments to the new early learning child development standards. So we have that to look forward to. And programs will be expected to start using the tool in the fall. So we're talking about now the fall of 2013 as they implement the new standards in programs. Model curricula for new standards is also being developed, and that will be available in the spring. This model will provide support for implementation of these new standards. And once it's developed, it'll be posted on our ODE website, which, by the way, is once again undergoing revisions and updates and hopefully enhancements and improvements. And all programs will be notified of both ways of receiving information and about any special events that we have that will be describing this tool. And then finally, professional development is going to be available to support programs in the implementation of these new early learning child development standards. And this professional development will provide an overview of the standards, and it will also allow professionals to go deeper into the developmental domains. One of the features of the professional development is that it is tiered. So as it stands right now, there are 3 tiers, each one digging deeper into specifics of the child development standards. And then finally, we are then starting to talk about the Step Up to Quality domains, and this is where we are beginning to talk about program standards. And the program standards that we are developing we're coming up on the end of the development period, and again, we're going to be training on these standards and processes beginning in the spring and the fall of this year. And as you can see, there are 4 domains, essentially, that we're looking at: learning and development, administrative and leadership practices, staff qualifications and professional development, and finally, family and community partnerships. And they represent categories that program standards are grouped. Programs will be required to meet standards in all of the domains, and additional points will also be available for such things as ratio group size as well as accreditation. So let's take a look at each of those domains more closely, beginning with the learning and development. And what we see in the learning and development domain, we have 3 strands. And the learning and development, they are talking about the essential areas programs should address in terms of environment for children. So we're looking at curriculum planning, child screening and assessment, and interactions in the environment. And in the main, what these standards try to address is the curriculum implementation and its links to assessment, screenings and assessments, as well as the quality of the learning environment and the quality of the teacher-child interactions. Moving on to administrative and leadership practices, here we're talking about staff management, benefits and compensation, and program administration. And these represent the management practices that need to be in place to support quality programs. These address benefits and compensation, program administration, and staff management. And this is one of the areas in which you can see the need to do things in a more comprehensive manner to ensure that we are not only including school districts, because school districts, for the most part, the things that are required in this area of staff management, the benefits and compensation, the program administration, are not key issues. But as we include community programs, including the home providers, looking at this area will be very important in terms of the program standards that we'll be using in order to implement the Step Up to Quality program. Then we go on to staff qualifications and professional development, and this represents the fact that research shows us that it makes a big difference in the quality of programs if you have people who have professional degrees and have professional development as well as experience. It supports the idea of continuous learning through professional development, and the whole area just takes a look at what we're doing in terms of supporting our staff. I think that's the most meaningful part of it for our district programs. But again, this shows the connection to community programs where issues around staff qualifications and professional development may be stronger levers in making changes and improvements for the programs that we offer young children. Then we look at the family and community partnerships, and under this heading we have transitions and family and community partnership and communication and engagement, which really does address the family and community partnerships. And this represents the strategies and practices for supporting children and family through transitions, as well as laying out some requirements for ways of communicating with families. And then we're bound to tackle the family engagement issue. And while it is represented in the standards, I think that this is an area where there's much work to be done, and it's very important to outcomes, for improving outcomes for our youngest learners. Okay, so we do have program monitoring coming up in the spring, and we are in a period of transition. We're essentially moving from the impact process, which has much in common with the Step Up to Quality process. So for this year, we're going to review program goals and submit impact documents by May. And I think you're probably aware of what that process entails and how you make your submissions. If you have any concerns about that, you can certainly contact us directly. We're also asking that you review the Step Up to Quality program standards, and it is just as impact, Step Up to Quality is a continuous improvement process. And you'll notice that on each of these slides, if you have not yet looked at the Step Up to Quality program standards that I just was referring to, you can find the website at the bottom of the slide on each of these slides. Visit our new website at earlychildhoodohio.org. And on that site, you will find not only updates about Step Up to Quality and Early Learning Challenge Grant, but also you will find both the child development standards and the program standards. If they're not already posted, they will be soon. And then finally, we wanted to let you know that there is a massive effort underway to support programs. There will be training available before the implementation of the new Step Up to Quality program standards. Some of it will be face-to-face training. A lot of it will be available online. So right now there's a large effort being assembled to try to support and provide the professional development to make these transitions from what we have been doing to our new Step Up to Quality, meeting our Early Learning Challenge Grant goals. One of these things is a new data system, and that's being designed to support an online process for the submission of the required documents and for registering for Step Up to Quality. So we really hope that that this will make your life easier, make your job easier, and we will be introducing this probably in the fall, but it could be as early as the spring of 13. But we're scheduling it pretty much for the fall. But we'll definitely provide you updates as we go along. Okay, and now I would like to talk a little bit about the third pillar. So we so far have talked about the child development standards, we've talked about the program standards, and now the third pillar of the early childhood grant is around the comprehensive assessment system. And this is a collaboration, as you probably all know, between Ohio and the state of Maryland. And this was one of the features in our application that I think resulted in Ohio getting the largest award for the for the Early Learning Challenge grant. I think that our federal friends were very intrigued by two states of different size, two states of some different approaches to early childhood coming together and forming a group that is going to be really helpful. So essentially, the purpose of the Early Childhood Comprehensive Assessment System is to support child development and academic achievement, to improve educational outcomes, and measure the progress of children in all of the essential domains as we look at school readiness. Programs will be required to complete these assessments, and these requirements will go into effect sometime in the fall of 2014. Components of the assessment include a formative assessment, and that would be for children 36 to 72 months old, a kindergarten entry assessment, which it will occur in the fall of the kindergarten year, and also this technology infrastructure that I talked about, which would capture the information that a teacher would gain, both doing formative assessments and as well as doing the more formal kindergarten entry assessment. One thing I always like to take the opportunity to make clear is that the kindergarten entry assessment is not a gateway assessment. It is not for districts to use to make a decision if the child is ready for kindergarten. As you know, the philosophy of the Ohio Department of Education and our office is that districts need to be ready for children, not children ready for kindergarten, although certainly that's the efforts we make in our preschool programs to help children be ready. But this is not a gateway assessment. This is information that's gathered in the beginning of the school year that helps the teacher decide on the instructional strategies that are needed, that help identify any strengths or challenges the child may have, and is used in planning and implementing curriculum. And then in terms of the professional development, as I think I mentioned before, some of this will be offered face-to-face, some of it through communities of practice. We're trying to, in the professional development area, because this assessment segment of our rollout is one that is going to require a lot of information and professional development to support it. So be looking forward to those opportunities. So looking at the scope of the comprehensive assessment, the assessment itself addresses all domains of school readiness, and again, we go back to the three new ones that we have that really give us a better picture of the whole child. It's a comprehensive assessment that's designed to accommodate all children, and since the assessment spans the 36 to 72 months, it allows for measurement of growth over time. The assessment was aligned to state and national standards, and assessment specialists in early childhood assessment as well as experts have been involved in the development of assessment items for the newly adopted Common Core Curriculum. They've been consulted to ensure that this assessment system is aligned to the rigorous college and career readiness standards and will be valid and reliable to measure growth over time, and fully validated in Maryland and Ohio to assure accuracy. So we're looking again at all domains, one comprehensive assessment with built-in accommodations for all students, valid and reliable to measure growth over time, aligned to state and national standards, and validated by national expert panel. And this includes Kathy Hebler, who has been, she is from the Early Childhood Outcome Center and is concerned with ensuring that whatever we put forward, especially for the formative preschool and even the KEA, that the childhood outcomes are represented. So the 7 developmental domains will be part of these assessments, and as you know, for each of these, there are learning progressions that are developed for all the standards in the 7 developmental domains, and it will provide a foundation for the formative assessments as well as indicators and benchmarks for the kindergarten entry assessment. These developmental domains, as you can see, include social foundations, physical well-being and motor development, language and literacy, math, science, social studies, and the arts. And the arts actually is a part of the Maryland kindergarten entry assessment, but right now it is not part of the Ohio assessment. So here's the timeline that we're looking at. We started this process right away. So in 2011, when we received the Early Learning Challenge Grant, we began a development process which continues today, and in fact, pilot testing is happening. So if you look at this, you'll see the phases of development are being implemented in a 3-step development process that follows research and best practice in the areas of assessment and development. And it's being utilized for the formative assessment and the kindergarten entry assessment. Through item analysis and testing, we'll be conducting these field tests, which will ensure validity. So the 3 phases that I just want to point out to you is the pre-pilot, which was the development phase, and during the pre-pilot phase, an external expert review by content area was conducted. Also, focus groups were conducted with teachers and other early learning professionals around considerations for assessment of the design, use of technology, and professional development that support the assessment. This has been a project of not only Ohio and Maryland, but also we use the services of technology folks from Johns Hopkins, and we use item development and overall looking more specifically at the elements that are going to be part of both the KEA and the formative assessment from WestEd, which I'm sure many of you are familiar. So following the pre-pilot, we're going to have the formal pilot, which is being set up now, and there was some cognitive interviews already conducted where teachers, this was a very small group, but a small group of teachers and students were given some test items, and there was an opportunity for the folks that were working on creating the elements to then interview the teachers and talk with them about the children's responses, as well as the ease of use of an element and other parts of the individual items. And then finally, in November of this year, we'll begin testing items with larger groups, larger sample, and this will be used as a baseline for information for Ohio as it relates to the kindergarten entry assessment. This will inform final items for the assessment, which will be fully implemented in the fall of 2014. So we have a little bit of time here, and once the new assessment is completed, then we will no longer be requiring the GGG or the crawl. The kindergarten entry assessment will replace the crawl as the statewide assessment. And I think that concludes the Early Learning Challenge Grant segment of our conversation today. And so if you have any questions about that, we'll take them at the end of the presentation. We're now going to move on to the second theme of our agenda today, which is the preschool special education updates. And there are going to be 3 areas that we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at reporting and monitoring, policy and standards, and then I want to give you an update on some issues that are coming soon. So we're going to start with the reporting and monitoring, and we'll begin with an overview looking at the annual progress report to OSEP and the indicators and the profile. We're going to look at those two first. So we can go on. Okay, great. So looking at this is a chart that you're very used to seeing. These are the 20 indicators from OSEP, and as we know, we've grouped them to make more sense of them, because just 1 through 20 doesn't really make much sense. But as you start looking at 6, 7, and 12, which are our early childhood indicators, we help answer the question, are young children with disabilities entering kindergarten ready to learn? So these indicators are particularly important to us, and Jeff is going to give us some information now about how our state actually did in terms of our annual progress report to our OSEP friends this year on these indicators. And that'll be followed by Kara Waldron doing a presentation regarding the profile, which uses the information that we garnered on each of these indicators to report to districts how they're doing. So first, the statewide overview.
Okay, the first preschool indicator is indicator 6. This is the one concerned with children being served in least restrictive environment. So there are the two categories. It's either children served in regular early childhood settings, children with IEPs served in regular early childhood settings, or those children served in either a separate special education class or in a different facility. And the rationales behind this indicator are that children learn from each other as well as from teachers and parents, and children must be able to function with children and people of varying levels of ability. So looking at the statewide numbers, we see the 11-12 baseline. Just over 50% of children in the state were reported to be in a regular early childhood program. In the children with IEPs, there were almost 44% in a separate class or facility. So based on these numbers, you can see the targets going out until 2014 and 15. So we hope to see a slight increase in a few more children being in the regular early childhood settings. This is indicator 7. Is focused on the child outcomes. This is the percent of children with IEPs who demonstrate improvement in each of the 3 outcomes: positive social emotional skills, acquisition of skills and knowledge, and use of appropriate behaviors to meet needs. So each one of those outcomes, there are 2 summary statements. So even though it's indicator 7, there are really like six categories within indicator 7. So for each of the outcomes, we look at the percent of children who enter the program below age expectations, the percent that substantially increase their rate of growth, and then we look at the percent of children who are functioning within age expectations in that outcomes. We've gotten a lot of interest on this indicator since the profile went up this year, and a lot of questions. The percentage for this indicator is based on the OSEP progress calculations, which is anything but straightforward and clear. So I know I've answered some questions about this, and I know that there are still some out there, so I'm working on putting together a document to, as simply as possible, explain how these are calculated, and then so hopefully districts can use that and look at their own data. There's lots of filtering that certain kids that districts think should be counted or not counted. So we hope to get some clarification out for that pretty soon, so we can all be on the same page as to what's being reported. This is the state results for Indicator 7, along with the targets that we created. So you can see in the first line is the summary statement 1, showing the percent that have increased their rate of growth by the time they exited. And you can see those percentages are pretty high and above the target, which is what we'd expect. With kids being in treatment for at least 6 months, you would hope to see a good rate of growth in them gaining new skills. The second line, the one function age expectations, the percentages are a little bit lower, right about at the target that we set. And again, this is what you'd expect. If these are children with IEPs, you would expect that a smaller percentage would be functioning at age expectations.
Just a word about this is that of the children entering the program below age expectations, that first summary statement really speaks to progress. So, to growth. So all children, regardless of, at least research tells us, all children, regardless of interventions, grow. They all grow over time. The second summary statement is about progress, and that's where we see that a greater effort needs to be made to better understand how we can help children achieve progress.
And the last indicator is Indicator 12. This is a compliance measure, looking at the percent of children from Part C, who are in Part C prior to age 3, who are eligible for Part B services, and have an IEP implemented by their 3rd birthday. Since this is compliance, we expect this to be 100%. And as a state, we've been focusing on this the last few years. So you can see in 04-05, it was 27% compliance, whereas in the last year, it's at 98, almost 99%. So we've made just incredible amount of progress in this over the last few years, and this is very important to make sure that the children that need services continue to get services as they turn 3 and go on through their preschool age. So that's it for the indicators, the preschool indicators. I'm going to turn it over to Kara here to talk about the online profile.
Okay, good morning, everyone. We're going to spend the next section of this webinar focused on the district special education profiles, starting with an overview of what the profiles are and what they're intended to accomplish, and then getting into more detail on the early childhood indicators that are captured within the profiles. So you'll see that before we go into some detail, I just want to remind everyone of the bigger picture, so to speak, with regard to notifications such as the profiles that districts receive from ODE related to their special education programs. So the first, being the profiles, which we're going to talk about today, and the second being special education determinations. So to remind everyone of the difference between those two, in a typical year, which you'll see when we go through the process timeline that this was not, but in a typical year, the profiles are the first notification that districts receive from what I guess we would say OEC, the Office for Exceptional Children, in partnership with the Office of Early Learning and School Readiness, with regard to their performance for students with disabilities in their special education programs. So the profiles are web-based, somewhat interactive tools that provide longitudinal data on the indicators that we've covered here this morning that were established by the Federal Office of Special Education Programs. And the intent of the profiles is twofold. As I said, they provide longitudinal data, but the most recent data for that reporting year are the ones that drive any required actions related to the compliance indicators specifically. So the intent is to notify districts of any required actions that they have for the current school year related to those compliance indicators. But more importantly, to provide longitudinal data to help with continuous improvement planning. So to help them answer the question, are we making progress for students with disabilities? Are we moving in the right direction on both our results and our compliance indicators as a whole? So again, profiles would be first, longitudinal data, notification of required actions, and then in June of each year, districts would receive their special education determination, which differs from the profile because it's based on only 1 year, the most recent full year of data that we have reported to us, and it includes only compliance indicators as opposed to both results and compliance, at least as determinations currently stand, which that may change as OSEP changes how they provide state determinations. So, typically determinations then, because they're based on the same data that are included in profiles, really shouldn't be a surprise to districts so much as they are an understanding of, okay, these are the same data that we knew about from our profiles, and we're sort of living with that, whether it's good or bad, in terms of our status from the previous year. So if we look at how this went down sort of in the most recent year, prior to the most recent special education profiles being released, the last notification that districts received from our office in partnership with Early Learning was their last determination, and that was in June 2012. And that was sort of the last activity based on those data from 2010-2011. And you see that those were received at the end of the 2011-2012 school year. The reason for that delay is that determinations have to be based upon the data that we report in our annual performance report, or APR, that Barbara mentioned. So our statewide data get reported in February of each year to OSEP. We receive a state determination based on those data in June of each year, and then we make local determinations, again, based on those same data, which are pretty outdated by the time those determinations are made. But that was the last activity, or the last notification, until in a typical year, we aim for November for release of the special education profiles. But as many of you know, this year we experienced significant delays in our ability to access and utilize the data because of the state auditor's investigation. So we waited and waited in hopes that the data would be officially finalized and we could create those profiles. And then we reached a point where we had to, in partnership with our office leadership teams, make the decision that if we wanted to have profiles this year, we would have to pick a date and say, okay, these are going to be the profiles based on the data, in this case, as of November 1st, 2012. We know that there are cases where there are inaccuracies in the data that districts perhaps didn't know about or knew about but weren't able to correct. So we're going to build in some flexibility with regard to the review processes that are related to the profiles. But that's what we had to do in order to create them and have them available this year. So, again, those were posted, if you will, since they're online at the beginning of this month in February. So, as I said, the one intent of the profiles is to notify districts of any required actions that they have for the year related to those compliance indicators. So those will be addressed in the coming months through, we can say, November at a minimum, while the districts create corrective action plans, verify new data, demonstrate systemic correction, and so on. As we can expect in June, we will make our determinations, again, based on those 11-12 data. So the determinations themselves, for the most part, shouldn't be a surprise because the 11-12 data are not only part of the profiles that were just posted, but drive any required actions. So if a district received a finding of noncompliance, let's say due to a 75% compliance rate for indicator 12, our transition from Help Me Grow services, then they really shouldn't be surprised when June comes around and they receive a lower determination because of that compliance rate for Indicator 12. So just a reminder about the big picture, what to expect, and the typical process that we follow each year. So, as we said, the profiles are intended to notify LEAs of required actions, and what that means typically is participation in what we call compliance indicator reviews to address, at least based on EMIS data, what appears to be noncompliance on those compliance indicators. And you'll see the graphic at the right of the slide is just a visual representation of the monitoring activities that are part of the general supervision system that we utilize here at ODE to ensure compliance and results for our students with disabilities. So the compliance indicator reviews are at the bottom because they certainly involve the largest number of LEAs, but often, thanks to the progress that you all have made on these compliance indicators, often they're about perhaps just one indicator, and in many cases just one or two students, which is certainly a preference because we know how easy it is to miss one timeline for one student as opposed to large numbers of districts with systemic issues and lots of missed timelines or missing components, if you will. And so another reminder, that's sort of the bottom. The next step up are the on-site reviews that we conduct in collaboration with the Office of Early Learning and School Readiness. And then finally, the most intensive selective reviews that are designed to address districts with more systemic issues and challenges. So this slide is just a quick refresher on when I talk about compliance indicators, we sometimes assume that everyone else speaks indicator like we do and knows these by their numbers in and out and can speak fluently in numbers, which we do now because of the APR and all of the 20 indicators. But we understand, and I say that in a joking way because we understand that these are but a small picture of what you do on a daily basis for kids or on behalf of kids. They were the indicators established by the federal government, and they're the ones that drive not only much of our activities, but our funding as well. So we have to focus on them. But we know that the profiles by nature of being exclusive to these indicators do not by any means paint a complete picture of what's happening for students with disabilities within a given district. But these are the indicators that would have the possibility of carrying some form of required action for LEAs. You can see from the list that they measure procedural compliance for students with disabilities, be that timelines or content of IEPs, for example, or just the focus on the accurate submission of data. And then the last two indicators are really compliance with submitting surveys. A couple of our indicators require that we collect surveys from every district, typically once every 6 years, in order to be able to report a representative sample for Ohio. So many of you are probably more familiar with the Parent Involvement Survey, which for preschool students is a 50-item survey that you may distribute to perhaps just a few parents or quite a few in hopes of getting at least half of them back so that we can report data at a state level and say that this is representative of our parents of preschool children with disabilities. So that's a reminder of all the indicators that carry potential required actions. But we're going to focus in the remaining section of this presentation on the early childhood indicators. And as I said, just as you do every day, the profiles are intended to balance both compliance and performance or results for students with disabilities, to help districts not only address required actions related to compliance indicators, but to, as a starting place, look at, are we moving in the right direction? And if not, what other data, what other questions, what other tools do we need to utilize to help us understand why we're not and to help us start making progress? So we're going to focus in now on some slides that are really just screenshots from a sample profile. I do apologize for the small font. I know that you have handouts, and you may have to get them very close to your faces in some cases to try and read the words on the slide. So for the most part, I'm using arrows or other mechanisms on the slide to help draw your attention to the specific piece that I'm talking about. But as Barbara said, we will have time for questions in just a few slides at the end of this piece. So if there's anything that just doesn't make sense, just feel free to ask it at that time. So as a reminder, the profiles are web-based. So when we talk about notifications coming from our office for Exceptional Children, again, the notifications come from our office, but the actual creation of the profiles is really based on a partnership with Barbara and Connie to identify the status of each district with regard to the early childhood indicators. But the notifications were sent out on February 4th, and it's an email notification that are sent to superintendents, whoever we have as special education director or contact for a district, and community school sponsors. And just for your information with regard to the special education contact, we try to use the information that's reported in OEDs for that person. However, because it's a fairly new designation in OEDs, not all districts even report that. So we maintain an internal database in OEC that we attempt to update on a regular basis of special education contacts so that we can hopefully have the most up-to-date information so that when these notifications go out, the people who are most likely to be not only utilizing them but responding to any required actions do have access to them. So in that email, there is a link to the web-based profile, as well as the login or username and the password. Each district has their own in order to maintain security and confidentiality, because these data are not only based on very small group sizes, sometimes just one student, but with regard to some of the compliance indicators, the profiles also provide links to student-level data to help you address, exactly which students, for example, were reported as not having their IEPs in place by their third birthdays. So if all goes well, a district clicks on the link, copies and pastes, hopefully, the username and password, just because the probability of typos is a lot higher with those passwords because there's lots of lowercase and uppercase and symbols utilized. But if all goes well, they copy and paste and click login. And they next see the screen that represents the indicators as they were presented to you several slides ago by Barbara. Not a laundry list of 1 through 20, but instead a list that really represents or answers or helps to answer some of the questions that we have with regard to a district special education program. And, of course, that group of questions that we're focused on this morning is the first one: are young children with disabilities entering kindergarten ready to learn? So we have the three indicators that Jeff went over that at least start to or help to answer that question in terms of the status. And to help you orient yourself in terms of the logistics or the interactivity of the profile, if nothing is clicked and you just look at the screen as it appears in the one that we're looking at, you can see that without doing any more clicks and really just even looking at the rightmost column, a user could quickly ascertain where they're meeting targets and where they're missing, thanks to our green and red colors. And as everyone in the preschool world can appreciate, our stars, and then occasionally our, if you will, icons, which are those triangles with the exclamation point in the middle, meant to indicate that there is some form of required action around that indicator. Not necessarily that there is noncompliance, although in some cases it is, but perhaps that the district has been flagged for investigation around that due to the data or perhaps lack of data reported. So then what would happen if you click on the if you can see them, and you probably don't have color copies, but on your screens, hopefully it's in color, those blue more information hyperlinks extend the information under each indicator, which is that's the view we're going to be looking at then in the ensuing slides for each indicator. So the first one we'll take a look at then will be the first indicator in the group, which is the Preschool LRE, and Jeff reminded you about what this indicator measures. So a couple things that are a little bit different about some of the indicators in this group. As I mentioned, for the most part, the profiles provide longitudinal data, meaning data for the last 5 years when available. So, for example, if a district were to look at their LRE data, they would see where they stand on, serving students in the general ed classroom for the last 5 years, and the percentage and the growth or perhaps, decline that they're making over time. You can see when looking at the graph on the left side of the screen that we only have 2 years of data for Preschool LRE. You guys, I'm sure many of you have been with us along the slow and bumpy ride of getting this indicator into EMIS, and more importantly, trying to ensure that the data reported are complete and accurate in terms of where students with disabilities are receiving preschool special education services. So we know how much work you've done over the past several years to ensure that these data are reported accurately, and we thank you for your efforts. Because it certainly means a lot to us at the state level. We can't get anywhere in terms of are we making progress, how are we doing compared to other states, if we don't feel confident that our data are complete and accurate. So you'll see that we have data for 2 years, and last year's profile was an attempt to give you sort of a heads up about this indicator, because the data weren't yet required to be reported at the state level, and we knew that this was the first time, at least on a statewide basis, that the data had been shared with you to show you, depending on what you may think about the percentage of students and where they're receiving services, here's what your performance looks like based on the data reported in EMIS. So the reason then that the rightmost column says NR rather than met or not met is that this is the first year that we have baseline data at a state level reported in our APR, and therefore the first year that we're actually establishing targets. So next year's profile will measure your performance against targets that have been established this year, whereas this year it's just baseline. And so we were a bit surprised after the profiles were posted and we had a flurry of phone calls and emails, which is completely understandable, with districts just wanting us to help them better understand what these indicators are, what they measure, why the graphs and numbers look the way they do. We received a lot more questions about the indicator 7, which we'll cover next, as opposed to this one. And I think a part of that reason is because there isn't a glaring red not met that makes the district say, why do I have this not met, and what can I do about it? Because it just says NR, perhaps it doesn't draw as much attention. Say, for example, and I'm sure this hasn't happened to anyone out there, but a superintendent who comes storming into your office and says, why do we have 6 red not mets under indicator 7, may not pay as much attention to a gray NR under indicator 6. But just as a reminder, you probably noticed on the slides that Jeff covered when he gave not only our statewide data, but then the targets that we've established moving forward. Those will be the targets that we measure each district against in the upcoming profiles. And you'll notice that they represent very incremental growth from our baseline. And that's not because we don't have high expectations in Ohio, but rather we have learned over the course of 7 or 8 years of doing the APR and establishing targets and attempting to collect complete and accurate data through EMIS, that it's best to start incrementally while we're still doing our work around ensuring that the data really are complete and accurate. And also to recognize that in cases like this, change that is systemic change, for example, is going to be incremental because changing the way and the mechanism by which students receive preschool special education services takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of collaboration. So it would be unrealistic for us to expect everyone out there to scramble and somehow increase those students that are in the regular settings and decrease in separate settings simply because we set really high targets for our APR. So that's why we're talking about incremental growth. We're still doing our best to understand how the data actually get reported based on all the different ways in which students are served and identify improvement activities, some of which are part of the Step Up to Quality initiative that Barbara described to help us move forward with this indicator. And next we'll focus on the one that we have received the most questions about, and perhaps that's because for several reasons. One, it has 6 different measures, so we call it one indicator, but it takes up a lot of room on the profile, and that can be good or bad. It can be, 6 green METs or perhaps 6 red not METs, or a combination of the two. That leaves the user rather confused in terms of how did we arrive at these percentages and what do they mean for us as a district. So just to remind everyone, the Indicator 7 data are derived from multiple sources, which makes this indicator complex by nature, in addition to the fact that it has 6 different measurements. So the Indicator 7 data represent a combination of Get It, Got It, Go, and the Ages and Stages questionnaire assessment data that are analyzed by IEP teams as part of the Early Childhood Outcome Summary form in order to determine whether the student has increased their rate of growth for the A measurements, and then the first measurement, and then is the child functioning within age expectations for the number 2 or the second measurement. And those data are reported in EMIS. However, this data actually lags, if you will, a year, and you'll see that in most of the other indicators. The most recent year that we have is 2011-2012, the most recent year of EMIS data reported to us. But the reason for that is that though the data are collected in EMIS, because of the measurement specifications that Barbara mentioned that were established by OSTEP, we in Ohio utilize the Early Childhood Outcomes Center to help us aggregate and analyze our data to ensure that they meet the federal reporting requirements. And they are very helpful, but we're one of many states that they serve, so we don't typically have our state-level data available to us until December of each year. And then in this case, we didn't have enough time to take those data, disaggregate them across every LEA, check and recheck to make sure they were accurate, and provide the most recent 11-12 data. So part of what makes this indicator confusing is that it represents what happened for preschool students with disabilities as reported in 10-11 being the most recent year. So sometimes that requires going back into your records and figuring out, okay, which kids were even counted that year because it was, a couple years ago by now. So that's just a reminder about the data lagging. And then the other part that can be confusing and potentially misleading about this indicator is that the data are often based on very small numbers of students, because we know that particularly in the case of our smaller rural districts, many preschool students with disabilities are served through consortia, and so the actual numbers of students who appear in the profile of their district of residence are really pretty small. They may aggregate up to a much larger number, let's say if we did a profile for the ESC, but because they go back to the district of residence, we may have only 2 students in the case of the example that you see on the screen. So a 50% might seem like, that's not very good, but really that represents 2 students, one of which made progress and was functioning within age expectations by exit, and one who wasn't. And so the other thing to keep in mind with this indicator, and Barbara captured this when Jeff went over the measurement, is to focus on are we making progress? Are we moving in the right direction? because the targets for this indicator are increasing every year as they're required to do through our APR. Just like with, for example, the proficiency on statewide assessments indicator for school-age students, many districts get discouraged by the what we could consider unrealistic targets in some cases for that one. Not so much with this one because they're more incremental, but they get frustrated and they feel like we've started at such a low level that even if, we jump up each year, we're not going to hit that target. And so we just want to remind you that the focus really should be on progress. Are we moving in the right direction, even if the growth feels like it's slow and incremental? And lastly, then, we'll look at Indicator 12, which is the one that is probably most familiar. And I apologize for the issue with the slide here. I think it's the nature of converting our PowerPoint slides into Archidin. Some of the text isn't displaying in those boxes, so they're actually not very helpful. But I think that your handouts probably have the text, or I hope so. So just kind of bear with me on that, or refer to your handout. But the first box that is missing text is pointing to the required action icon, just as a reminder that of the group that we've covered so far, this is the first one that would have actual required actions. The other indicators, 6 and 7, are considered performance or results indicators, and those data are provided to districts to help with continuous improvement planning. But they don't have required actions, so to speak. There's no corrective action plan that must be developed because you're below the target on 7C, but rather just to help with the larger data analysis and improvement efforts that you have in your district. And that's pretty different from the last two that we're going to talk about, the first being Indicator 12, early childhood transition, because it does require the district to do something, to submit something to Connie Prairie or to collect data over the next several months, for example. But the good news about what we're seeing with regard to districts that have required actions for Indicator 12, and these specifically are those districts who reported at least one student as not having an IEP in place by the third birthday. They transitioned from Help Me Grow, they were found eligible for preschool special education, and the IEP date was not by the third birthday, nor was there what we call an excusable noncompliance code reported to tell us the reason why. So all we can tell from EMIS data is that this appeared to be late, and if it, just based on the EMIS data, it would be a finding of noncompliance and have some required actions related to it. So this is definitely an example of an indicator where it helps to click on that blue More Information hyperlink in order to get first the table that you see, which would be an example of a district who reported 22 total students transitioning from Part C or Help Me Grow, and only 21 of them had those IEPs implemented by the third birthday. The next screen, because it's just too much to squeeze into one, will then show you what's under that, which is a description of the process. That really is that compliance indicator review that we talked about at the beginning of this section to cover the steps that have to be followed. And though the first step that you can see, provided that you can actually read it, talks about developing a corrective action plan, the typical first step that most districts follow, and certainly the one that we recommend, will be to figure out, okay, which kid are we talking about here? Which one was late? What happened? What are the dates? And that information is available. You can see the arrow here, though it's not showing, the box says student data. And if you click on the blue Records for Review hyperlink, it opens an Excel file that would display the information for the student reported as not having the IEP by the third birthday. So it will provide the SSID, because that's what we have to work with here at ODE, as well as the dates reported, and the noncompliance code field will either be blank, as it is in many cases, or it will be one of those reasons that aren't considered excusable, things like staff not available or scheduling conflicts, for example. But the first step that we recommend is to take that information that appears in that Records for Review Excel file and compare it to the student's record. Because in many cases, what appears to be noncompliance is actually a reporting error. So perhaps a date was misreported, or the noncompliance code wasn't reported to actually reflect a common reason for things being late, which, let's say, for example, the parent and as part of the IEP team agreed to delay implementation of the IEP until the school year begins, for example, even though the child turns 3 over the summer. Well, depending on how that gets reported, if all we see is the actual date, for example, that they developed the IEP, we can't tell that that was the decision that they arrived at without either the noncompliance code, or in this case, we would want to look at supporting documentation to verify. But if that's the case, if what looks like noncompliance is actually reporting errors, we highly just recommend that you submit documentation of that to Connie in lieu of the action plan, so that we can have our first step be, was this really noncompliance? If it wasn't, then we can remove the finding and adjust your profile so that it shows that you really did meet the target. And unfortunately, if it is, then we do have to move forward with the corrective action plan and the tracking of students transitioning this year in order to demonstrate correction. So the second indicator that would carry required actions related to early childhood data would be, technically, it's under Indicator 20, which, as a reminder, it captures complete and accurate data reporting. And the reason that this would appear under Indicator 20 as opposed to just being up with Indicator 12, like the situation we just described, is that this represents districts being flagged for what we call low numbers for Indicator 12. So based on their size, they've either reported no students transitioning from Help Me Grow who are found eligible, or just a handful, and perhaps they represent a large district from which we would expect at least a few or far more based on their size. So it's a data investigation to start with. It's not meant to imply that there is noncompliance, but rather to check to make sure that all the students who are transitioning are getting reported accurately in EMIS. And so instead of doing a corrective action plan, in this case, the district completes a tracking form, which requires them to utilize those reports provided by their local Help Me Grow service provider to make sure that we do have that collaboration and relationship so that all the students are being captured. So that's what we have in terms of the early childhood indicators, both the results indicators and those that have required actions related to compliance. So at this time, we'll take some questions if you have any.
We still have some information on reporting. Let's see if you'll go on to the next one. On reporting as it relates to preschool special ed units.
Okay, the preschool special ed units that were allocated this fall/winter, it's still open for LEAs to submit data into EMIS to make sure they get the full funding. Currently, there are a handful of LEAs that aren't on target to get the full funding for the units they were allocated. It could be some examples of why could be improper staff reporting codes or students not linked correctly to teachers or related service staff. If you want to know the detail of the amount of preschool special ed funding, you can look at the ECE staff units report. That's put out after every data run by EMIS. And if you have that report and have any questions, you can contact me and I can work through and we can figure it out what the issue is. EMIS will be open. The EMIS October will be open till March 22nd. That's when it's scheduled to close right now. As we learned last year, it might not actually close then. It could be extended, but but adjustments to the special ed units will be okay until EMIS October closes, so try and have those in before March 22nd. There are a couple EMIS issues to talk about quickly here. For children who transition from Part C but are not suspected of being a child with a disability, should be included in the aggregate EMIS record, but not in the special education record. Children determined ineligible after the initial ETR should be withdrawn from the program, and if they return, a new record should be opened. The initial ETR, or IETR, is the one associated with eligibility. And this is something that can affect the not met for indicator 12. Another issue is that the PRO1 may be used to delay the consent for the evaluation, because once the consent is signed, the timelines must be met. You need to stick to those. So you can avoid issues in EMIS by delaying the consent, not the evaluation.
And this is the second example of a workaround. This came about, if you recall, until a few years ago. We had referrals from Help Me Grow. We had the 120 days. It fit very nicely with the 30 days for referral, the 30 days till evaluation, the 60 days till the IEP, and 30 days then. So it worked out really well. But we don't have that anymore. We have referral can be made 9 months to 90 days before the child's third birthday. And by the way, what we're talking about with regard to this PRO1 issue are for those children who are transitioning from Help Me Grow. We're not talking about every child in using this. This is our workaround. We're trying to get a outcome in EMIS for preschool transition conferences where a non-compliance code could be indicated in the outcome section, so that if you have a child who's referred to Part B 6 months prior to the third birthday, it's really not best to do an evaluation at that time to determine eligibility, because it does not fit the other timelines that we are required to use. So if you have sufficient documentation in using the PRO1 form where you indicate that everybody is in agreement that consent is going to be postponed, and you actually present some timelines that are workable, you will not be found out of compliance. However, if you have a child that has a referral date 6 months prior and you have the parent sign consent, and then you don't do the evaluation until closer to the third birthday, you will be found out of compliance for indicator 11, which measures the time between consent and the evaluation. So this, again, is the way we are working around this issue of things that are particular to the way our state operates. And we'll have a chance to ask any questions about that at the end.
And just another reminder that the EMIS October reporting period is still open. So if you have any changes in data, the special ed units or ECE students or anything like that, you have at least until March 22nd to make those changes. So check your reports now and contact me if you have any questions.
So going back to the other things we were talking about with regard to the EMIS issue. So if you have a child, if you look through your records, do you have a child that only had a preschool transition conference, and at that conference you did not suspect a disability? Do they have a special education record? If they do, you have a chance until March 22nd to make that change. Make sure that they appear in the aggregate number and not as a preschool special education record. Did you have a child, this is a very common thing that occurs, did you have a child that you did an evaluation, they were not eligible, they come back 3 months later, they did originally come from Help Me Grow, but you've never withdrawn that record. So it looks like they had a preschool transition conference, and then 285 days later, they had an IEP. Because you've not withdrawn that record, then I also get a lot of questions, well, isn't that a reevaluation? Didn't they have an initial evaluation? Isn't the next evaluation? No, if the child was not eligible when they had an evaluation and they have another evaluation, that next evaluation is the initial ETR. It's not a reevaluation. And so that child who came from Help Me Grow and didn't qualify after an evaluation comes back 3 months later, has another evaluation, that's the IETR, they're found eligible, that's what should appear in the record. And any mention of Help Me Grow at that point, because the child is not coming directly from Help Me Grow at that point. They're coming as a referral as any child would come with a referral. And so if you reflect that accurately, then when we look at the information, we don't have to investigate. This year we had to investigate, I think it was 35 districts for these kinds of errors. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of connect those two. So you got a chance till March 22nd. Look for those errors, fix them up.
Jeff and I would appreciate it.
Yes.
Okay. The next section is kind of covering just a variety of situations that have come up. We are, in fact, accepting waivers, classroom size waivers, which is either a 9th child with an IEP in the class or occasionally a 17th child in the class. Those waiver applications are available at our website. They are called class size waivers. That's the title of them. We do keep a record of who has requested waivers in the past and how many have been requested. Please note that if a district continues to request waivers, that those requests may be denied. So please look at your history, look at the number of children that you anticipate coming from Help Me Grow so that you can make some plans for next year. We all understand that there are situations beyond your control, but we anticipate that you will do the best planning that you can using the tools that you have available. Also note that there is on the waiver application a list of reasons why an application might be denied. If you request more than 6 waivers at a time, that request is probably going to be denied. 6 children equals a class. And so please pay attention to the fact that you really need to look at what's going on with children, and we need to make sure that we are providing the best education possible. If you have questions about that, please don't hesitate to call me, Connie, because that's kind of one of the things I'm handling right now. In the on-site monitoring, I am part of some of the on-site monitoring teams. This year we have done or are in the process of doing 33 on-site reviews. We have seen some improved results over the state in measurable goals. It's obvious that people have been trying really hard to make sure that the goals are measurable. We still have some issues, but they're improved. We also have, in some places of the state, just the justification for removal from special ed. So why is the child not receiving all of their special education services with their peers? It is crucial that you put in that section the characteristics of the child that require removal. Not just because it's a quieter environment or because it's easier for the related service person, or it may not even be where the equipment is, which is another thing that I'm starting to see. That's where the equipment is. So really, what are the characteristics of the child that require that those services cannot be provided in the classroom or with their typical peers? And then we're going to talk about some things that need some improvement. we were doing better with the evaluation forms, but recently I am seeing that the planning forms are not complete. It is not clear who is doing what. It is not clear that all 4 methods of assessment are used for each area of suspected disability. So, for example, if you have a child who is going to be evaluated for concerns in the area of communication and social-emotional development, you need to be using all 4 methods across both of those areas. It is also often not clear which role, if a person's name is in a box, it is not clear if that's the teacher, the psychologist, parent, or who that is. So that needs to be very clear. It is also most beneficial if the planning form is attached to the report so that when you or an on-site monitoring person or the person in the next district where the child moves to is looking at that evaluation, they have all the information that they need. So having things separate is really challenging because all of the pieces don't necessarily get to the next district or to the next teacher with that child.
Just another word or two about informed consent, that if you don't have the parents' involvement in reviewing the evaluation planning form and in contributing to some of the evaluation, whether it's an interview or a parent observation, that the parent contributes their observation of how their child is functioning, or you're not interviewing the parent, then that level of involvement is really what constitutes informed consent. So they really understand what it is that's going to be evaluated, and they have an opportunity to make suggestions. So I think that's an area where we could improve.
I agree. Okay, the next area of improvement is in the area of specially designed instruction. This is a definition which is adapting as appropriate to the needs of an eligible child, the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction. Really what we're looking for is what is the instruction going to be for this child? What is specific and special for this child? So the methods and the delivery of instruction needs to be listed in there as the how. So the what that you're going to do is in the goals. It's in the rest of the IEP. The who is also important. Is the teacher going to be delivering that major and specially designed instruction? Or is it going to be a related service person? Or is it going to be a combination? Our children who are in center-based classrooms are probably going to receive most of their specially designed instruction from a teacher, most of the time. And so that needs to be described, what it is that you're doing for that child, even if you're doing it for several other children. So it might be a highly structured environment. It might be visual supports. It could be a whole variety of things. But that needs to be listed, not direct instruction in social emotional development. That doesn't tell us anything about how. So the parent doesn't really know what you're going to do. And the teacher next door who now inherits the child also doesn't have any idea of how that instruction needs to be carried out for that particular child. Okay. The other thing that we're looking at in monitoring is the Early Childhood Outcome Summary form. And as we've talked about already, the data quality and the quantity is in question. We did send out last spring a quality assurance checklist that may be used by supervisors to spot check. If you need that assurance checklist again, I will get it to the SSTs and you can get it from them if they do not have a copy currently. But that checklist can be used to improve the data. That checklist specifically addresses, it's on the next slide, but it's very small. It specifically addresses, was it completed in a timely manner? Was the entry date put in when it was supposed to be, in the appropriate window? Are all of the timelines met as they are supposed to be? And then, does each outcome have a rating? Does it indicate whether there was progress or not? So this whole checklist gives you all of the information that you need in order to ensure that your data is going to be helpful to you, that it's submitted and it's completed, and there's information that is helpful. The other piece of information just to note is that districts that we have monitored this year that have been using the alternate form, the newer form, the data and information is much better and much clearer. There is information on that form that indicates why the child is receiving a 4 versus a 5, or why you're saying that they have made progress from a 4 to a 5. So it is not a requirement. You may use either form, but it is just a note that the alternate form is providing a framework for people to provide to look at the information and to give more accurate and helpful information for the team. Okay.
And while we will talk more about Indicator 7 even a little further, some more in the rest of the presentation, using this checklist, this quality assurance checklist, is something you can do immediately. You don't have to wait for any upgrades or any further guidance or any other data or information. You can use this checklist right away, and we really think that it would have an immediate impact in terms of the quantity and quality of the data.
Right.
So we really encourage you to use it as we try to improve the system and the process.
Okay. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to talk briefly about is some policies and standards. One of the things the changes have been that are occurring are around the seclusion and restraint policy and around the proposed operating standards and the process for that. Go ahead. Okay, the seclusion and restraint policy is a statewide policy. It applies to all districts and all children, 3 to 21. The restraint policy and seclusion policy incorporates positive behavior intervention and supports, and there is a group working across the state to provide information and training on PBS. And that is not specific to preschool. It is across all grades. And this policy limits the use of restraint and seclusion. Okay, so seclusion means the involuntary isolation of a student, and seclusion does not apply to preschool. Licensing indicates that you may not leave a preschool child alone. Preschool child may not go anywhere unaccompanied. So we don't have to worry about seclusion at all. Preschool should be included as districts are creating their positive behavior support plans. And we have many supports that are available to us and will be coming around supporting children's social emotional development and their behavior, but we need to be fitting that into the district PBS plans. The seclusion and restraint policy, if you want to look at it, is available at that link. So that's why that's there. Okay, go on to the next. Okay. I will say that back on the last slide, restraint may be used in preschool. However, there are significant requirements around the use of restraint. The basic requirement is restraint may only be used for safety. So it may not be used if a child is not behaving as you wish they would behave, but if a child is throwing chairs, those are the kinds of instances where a restraint would be used. If you have questions about that, please look at the policy or contact me, and I will give you more information about that. Okay. We have some proposed changes to the operating standards. The first one is around evaluation, non-use of a single measure, some additional information around extended school year, and a little bit around transportation. And I'm going to go through each of these, but you may provide comments at the link that is listed there. Okay. So the first rule proposed change is around evaluation. There are specific criteria where, at the current moment, any child who is moving from preschool services to kindergarten must have a reevaluation to determine if they are eligible for school-age services. Basically, what we are proposing is to remove that to say that if the timeline is up, if it's 3 years, the child must be reevaluated. If the child's parent or a teacher requests a reevaluation to gather additional information, an evaluation must be conducted. A child who has been served under the category of developmental delay must have a reevaluation because developmental delay is not a category that is recognized in school age. And so they must be reevaluated for a different category. And so that is one of the reasons, is also to make a change in a disability category. So if you've been serving a child under the category of speech and language impairment, but the team has determined over time that there is a cognitive or intellectual delay or autism or some other kind of issue, you might need to make that change. The children that this will primarily affect are those children who are coming in now. They are evaluated as a child, a preschool child, maybe under developmental delay or maybe under another category, but then you have to reevaluate those children again in May. And really, at this point, you're probably going to have the valid information that you need in order to serve that child in kindergarten. So that is the primary effect that this will have, I think. Okay, next one. Okay, under eligibility. This is not really new, but it is a reiteration of the fact that a single measure or score may not be used. All 4 methods of assessment may be used, and this also ties to the children with who are hearing impaired or visually impaired, because there are some proposed changes around the definitions and the requirements for children who are hearing impaired and visually impaired.
And this really just, when we talk about in the last paragraph, no single source of information, the additional language was just to clarify source of information. So it just provides the example of such as a single measure or score.
Right.
And that's really, it's a very small change. But we wanted to reiterate that single measures or scores should not be used.
Okay. This also is not really new, but it is reiterated and stronger language. If a child is moving from Part C to Part B, extended school year services must be considered and provided if a child needs those based on the data that you have from Help Me Grow or the child's disability. So that they do not have to have received any previous school experience to warrant needing extended school year services. There is no ability for the district to say, well, we haven't seen the child in our program yet, so extended school year services are not required, or we're not going to provide them. That is not the case. One of the questions that has been raised in some of the meetings that I've been attending around the regions is the fact that Help Me Grow data is not necessarily very strong. So this is an opportunity for districts to be working with their Help Me Grow partners to gather, to help them understand some of the information that might be helpful in serving the children between the 2 programs. And last but not least, I think, is preschool transportation. At the current moment, we've been battling, Barbara and I and some other people, around transportation for quite some time. But really, transportation must be listed and provided for a child who is unable to access the program for whatever reason. So it is not linked to a disability. It is not necessarily linked to all of our children within a mile radius are not provided transportation. If it is required for that child to access the services, then transportation must be provided by the district. Anything else you want to say about that?
Nope.
Okay. Okay, and then here are the timelines. Currently, we are conducting regional meetings. Barbara's been at some, I've been at some, with the Office for Exceptional Children. In June, the State Board of Education will review this. In September, we hope to pass the resolution of intent. In October, we plan to have the rules filed with JCAR. November 11th, a public hearing at the State Board meeting. December 9th, resolution. January 14th, implementation. And SUSAC has been very clear that we understand that implementation of new rules is difficult mid-year, and we will do the best we can at that point, but there will be significant and absolute implementation by July of 2014. We understand that implementation mid-year is challenging.
Okay, so we're going to start talking about our last section, which is things that are coming soon. And we're going to just touch briefly on the Ohio Teacher Evaluation System, OTES, the Preschool Special Education proposed funding changes, the improved process for child outcomes, Indicator 7, and then opportunities for itinerant teachers. So this is what we've been able to clarify to date with the OTES process. We know that teachers who work at educational service centers will be participating in the evaluation system. Itinerant teachers who are exclusively itinerant teachers will not participate. Those itinerant teachers, though, that have a combination of center-based and then do itinerant teacher perhaps 1 day a week, will participate in their center-based classrooms. And with regard to teachers who teach at boards of developmental disabilities, we're continuing to seek clarification. Our office their plan is to include them, but I know that some DDs have some issues with being included. So we're continuing to seek clarification. And I would say in general that on this topic, we have a long ways to go. This and also the student learning outcomes, we have a long ways to go in developing information and guidance to the field. So bear with us. This is on our radar, but we are at the beginning of this process. Preschool was not a part of it from the beginning. So, and of course we have everything else going on with regard to our Early Learning Challenge grant and all the changes that that's going to be bringing. So we are working on it. With regard to the proposed budget, which is fiscal year 14-15, which actually begins July 1 of 13, we're very excited to report that in the proposed budget there is a 22% increase in funding for this coming fiscal year, and an additional 1% increase in fiscal year 15. And what's interesting about the 22% increase is that as we look at our unit funding, we see that with regard to teacher units, that currently we support approximately 78% of units, of preschool special education units. So it's very interesting and also makes a lot of sense that a 22% increase would be enough to provide funds for those units that are currently not funded. The shift will likely be coming about with regard to moving from unit funding to weighted per child funding as it is in school age. And the weighted by disability category will be using the already existing categories in school age. And one thing that I was very concerned about and so tracked down an answer, and that is developmental delay will be considered a Category 2. And that was concerning because I am hoping that our categories will still represent the needs of our children, and I think that having developmental delay in 2 made sense to me. So those are these are proposed. We have a long way to go until we know that we're actually moving forward, but this is essentially what the governor is proposing in his 14-15 budget. In addition to that, in that same budget, which will come about in the second year of the biennium, there is a $2 million increase in funding for ECE programs. That represents somewhere a little less than 500 additional slots for children, for low-income children. There has not been a plan for dissemination of those additional slots at this time, but we will be working on that with the governor's office. So it's good news for early childhood. I did want to mention that the allocation, the $90 million, which has early childhood in its name, is a source of revenue that will be provided to districts. Again, it's proposed, and it will be able to be used for preschool through grade 12. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in terms of preschool, because districts will be able to use it as they choose, and it would not necessarily have to show up in early childhood. So that's exciting, but I don't know how applicable it's going to be to early childhood. And then finally, we have we have a couple of items left. One is the improved process for child outcomes. In light of the reduced quantity and quality of our Indicator 7 data, and in conjunction with the Child Outcome Center, we've begun to engage in a process to evaluate our entire Indicator 7 process, because it really is, as you'll come to see in the Step Up to Quality work, and as we continue with our assessment, our formative assessment in KEA, it's very central to this huge systems change that we're trying to create in Ohio at this time. And this evaluation process of what it is Ohio has been doing around Indicator 7 is involving stakeholders from regional and local level. Both our SST 8 and our SST 6 are involved, as well as representatives from regional Help Me Grow programs, county Help Me Grow programs, and we've also involved some teachers at the local level. With Kathy Hebler, who is a person who works with the Child Outcome Center, and Cornelia Taylor. We've also included in some of our conversations folks from the Department of Health from Help Me Grow at the state level, in an effort to even look at the whole birth to 5 issue of outcomes for children. So it's very exciting. What we have discovered is we have a long ways to go in terms of getting information and input from stakeholders so that we can begin to craft a process that is really going to be meaningful, that is going to allow us to understand the children who are eligible for special education in Part C and Part B, and how they're doing and how they're progressing and how we can influence that. So I'm really looking forward to sharing more with you, and we will be doing that in the future. Even now, there's the ongoing professional development available through the SSTs. But I guess what I wanted to say about Indicator 7 is that, and I made this comment at another meeting recently, that in 2004, as you saw, we, in the area of transition, were at 27%. And we got really serious about ensuring that transitions were taking place in a timely manner. We put a lot of effort into it. We made a big difference. I mean, my goodness, we're at almost 99%. It's just like an amazing thing. My feeling is that around this outcomes issue, that we can do much, much better in not only in creating positive outcomes, but in collecting the data, in understanding the process, in implementing assessment, in implementing curriculum and standards, and all the different parts of the process that we're doing around the Early Childhood Challenge Grant that can really make a difference for young children. So we are going to be focused in the next few years very much on this Indicator 7 improved process for child outcomes. So I wanted to communicate that to you, and you'll be hearing more about that as we move through this evaluation process and we create a series of next steps. And the other issue with regard to supporting our Early Learning Challenge Grant and our young learners has to do with opportunities for itinerant teachers. As we develop additional high-quality settings, which we will note that they're high quality through our step-up process, our tiered quality rating system, as we have more and more of those classrooms available to us, hopefully more and more children will be placed in those classrooms who have IEPs. And so we need to increase our capacity in terms of itinerant teachers, not only the individual's capacity, but also the numbers of itinerant teachers that are available in Ohio to meet this need and to try to improve. Because if you think about it, then this impacts our LRE work as well, and it's taking small steps to universal preschool. So just to let you know that there is a planning group that's considering the PD needs for itinerant teachers at this time. Another thing that's happening, this has less to do with us, but the University of Toledo is exploring an itinerant teacher endorsement. And this is another area, this and the outcomes with regard to special education and educating children with disabilities are necessary steps in building capacity, and they're crucial for the future of our programs and our young learners. So that concludes the information we wanted to present to you. I liked this quote and wanted to share it with you. We have a lot of goals at this time, so we're got a lot to look at. But I think that if we begin with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey says, and we keep our eyes on our goals, which are improvements for our young learners, especially those with disabilities, those who are coming from families who have low income, and those who are English language learners, I think that we are the people who make the difference.